The land north of Linden Crossing had a way of making people honest. Not the kind of honest that came from church or consequence, but the kind that came from cold and distance, and the simple arithmetic of what you had left after a long winter. She had heard this said once by a man on a platform in Winnipeg who was waiting for the same westbound train she was, and she had not believed him then. She believed him now. She arrived on a Wednesday in early November when the sky was the color of unbleached wool and the wind came off the flats without apology. The bus depot was a single room attached to a hardware store, and the woman behind the counter was writing something in a notepad and did not look up when the door opened. When she did look up, her expression was the expression of someone who had seen many arrivals and learned that most of them came to the same few things. She said she was looking for a man named Croft. She produced a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket, the kind of paper a person folds and unfolds many times until the creases go soft, and read the address from it even though she had memorized it 3 towns back. The woman set down her pen. She looked at the bag on the floor beside the door. She looked at the coat, which good wool, but had been worn for many seasons. Then she said, without any particular inflection, that Croft's place was 4 miles out on the Thornfield Road, and that he would not be in until supper time because he was putting new rafters on the north barn and would not stop until the light went. She said she would wait. She set her bag beside the door where it would not be in anyone's way and stood at the window that faced the main street. Outside, a man in a yellow jacket was loading bags of feed into a pickup. A boy on a bicycle crossed the street without looking, the way boys do when they know every vehicle in town and have already calculated the odds. A dog sat in the doorway of the farm supply across the road and watched the street with the patient authority of an animal that has decided the whole town is its concern. The woman at the counter went back to her notepad. After a while, she said, without looking up, that there was coffee on the burner if she wanted it. She said thank you. She poured a cup and stood at the window with it and watched the street thin out as the afternoon moved toward dark. She had come from Kenora. Before that, Dryden. Before that, a place she did not name to strangers and no longer named to herself. The letter from Croft had been 6 weeks old when she received it, forwarded twice through addresses that had been accurate when she gave them, and were not accurate by the time the letter arrived. The handwriting was plain and even. The handwriting of someone who had learned to write in a school that valued legibility over expression. The letter said he had a property north of Linden Crossing, that he was running a small beef operation and needed someone capable for the winter, that the work was steady and the house had a room with its own door to the outside, and he understood that mattered to some people. That was the sentence she had returned to. He understood that mattered to some people. Not an apology, not a promise, just a man accounting for what he knew and leaving room for her to account for what she needed. She had written back from a payphone in Dryden because she did not have a stable address to receive a reply from and did not say so. She said she was capable and would arrive in November if the position was still open. She had not heard back. She came anyway. There was a logic to that which she had not needed to examine closely. The light at the hardware store counter was starting to matter when a truck turned off the main road and pulled up in front. Dark green, older, with a cracked side mirror held on by a bungee cord. The man who got out moved the way men move when they have been working since before daylight and have made their peace with it. He was not a large man, but he took up the space he occupied without apology. His jacket had a tear in the right elbow that had been mended and torn again. He came through the door and his eyes went to the woman at the counter. First, a nod of recognition, the comfortable shorthand of people who have known each other for years without being close. Then his eyes came to her. She did not move. She let him cover the distance. He stopped 2 steps away, which felt correct, not crowded, not cautious, just the right geography for 2 people who did not yet know each other's rhythms. He said, "You came." She said, "I said I would." He looked at her in a way she recognized as honest, not measuring her for anything specific, just trying to match the person in front of him to some interior picture he had been carrying. She let him do it. She was doing the same thing. Then he said, "Road up to the place is all right if the temperature holds." "They're saying it might not," she said. "Then we should go." He picked up her bag. He had not asked, but he glanced at her coat pocket first, checking that she had what she needed before he lifted it. She noticed that, filed it in the column she was building, the one she did not have a name for yet. The woman at the counter said, without looking up, "Tell Mrs. Bowen I'll have her order in by Friday," not to either of them in particular. Just to the room he held the door. Outside, the temperature had dropped a degree or two in the time she had been inside. The sky to the northwest was doing something complicated with the last of the light. He put her bag in the truck bed, and she climbed up to the passenger seat without waiting. The door had a particular trick to the handle. She worked it out on the second try and did not ask for help. He started the truck and they pulled out onto the main road, and then onto a gravel road that ran between fields and wire fence, the last of the snow from the week before visible in the ditch as a thin gray line. He did not speak immediately, neither did she. The heater worked but took its time about it. After a while he said, "There's a boy, Levi, comes by after school most days. Helps with the stock, you'll see him around." She said, "How old?" He said, 12. "Good kid. Doesn't talk much." She said, "All right." The truck's headlights had come on by themselves, motion triggered, and they lit the road ahead in a clean, pale arc. She watched the fence posts go by. He turned off the gravel onto a dirt track that ran between two rows of spruce that had been planted long ago and had grown up into a corridor, the branches meeting overhead in the dark. The farmhouse at the end of it was low and broad, with a porch across the front that wrapped around one side. A light was on in the kitchen window. Beside the house, a large barn with a new line of roofing along the peak where the old boards had been replaced, the new wood still bright against the weathered gray. He braked in the yard and cut the engine. She climbed down. Cold was immediate and specific, the kind that settles into the back of your neck first and works its way down. She stood in the yard a moment and took it in. He brought her bag to the porch. She followed. The front door was unlocked. Inside, a kitchen that ran along one wall and a front room with a wood stove that was going, the heat of it hitting her when she stepped through the door. A table with 4 chairs, 3 of which had something stacked on them, seed catalogs, a coil of rope, a pair of work gloves. The 4th was clear. He set her bag down beside the stairs. "Room's up and to the left," he said. "The door at the end of the hall has a lock. Keys on the ledge above it." She looked at the stairs, then she looked at him. He said, "There's soup on the back burner. Lamb. I put it on this morning." She said, "I'll warm it." He went back out. She heard his boots on the porch, the sound of him moving toward the barn. She turned to the stove and found a clean pot and ladled the soup into it and set it over the element on low. While it heated, she stood at the kitchen window and looked at the yard and the dark shape of the barn and the light on inside it, visible through a gap in the sliding door. She found 2 bowls on the second shelf, both plain, both the same. She set them on the table and moved the gloves to the windowsill and the catalogs to the counter. The rope she left where it was because she was not certain yet what was hers to move. He came back when the soup was ready. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink, thorough and automatic, the habit of a man who washes his hands at the end of every day because the work requires it and not because anyone is watching. He dried them on the towel on the rack beside the sink. He looked at the table, at the cleared chairs, at the bowls. He said nothing about it. He sat down and she ladled the soup and sat across from him and they ate. Outside, the wind had come up. It moved around the corners of the house in the particular way wind does in open country, finding every edge and testing it. The wood stove ticked as the metal expanded. The overhead light was warm and low. She ate the way she had learned to eat when she was uncertain of her next meal and could not let that uncertainty show. Steadily, without waste. And she noticed that about him without being able to explain yet why it seemed significant. When he finished, he set his spoon in the bowl and looked at it for a moment. Then he said, "It's good," meaning the soup. She said, "It was already good, I only warmed it." He said still. She did not answer. She stood and took her bowl to the sink and washed it and set it on the rack. After a moment, he brought his bowl over and she washed it without comment and added it to the rack. A small negotiation. Neither of them acknowledged it. She went upstairs. The room at the end of the hall was what he had said. A single bed, a window that faced east, a hook on the wall, a radiator that worked. Key was where he'd said. She locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed in her coat for a while. Not because she was cold, but because it helped to sit with the full weight of a decision after you had made it. She was up before him. She had not slept easily, the unfamiliar sounds of the house keeping her at the surface. The furnace cycling. The branches of a spruce against the east gable, the particular silence of a house that is used to having one person in it. When sleep let her go at 5, she rose and dressed and went downstairs and put the coffee on and stood at the kitchen window while it brewed. The yard was dark and still. The barn sat solid against the gray pre-dawn, and above it the sky had begun its slow change at the edges. She had her hands around a cup when she heard him on the stairs. He stopped in the kitchen doorway for a moment. He looked at her and at the coffee, and something moved through his expression that she could not fully read. Then he came in and poured his own cup and stood at the other end of the counter. She said, "What's the morning?" he said. "Rafters on the north barn. I've got the lumber staged. Levi will be here by 3 after school. Before that, I could use a second pair of hands if you're willing." She said she was willing. He looked at her once, just briefly, in a way that seemed to cost him something to do. Then he set his cup in the sink and went to put on his work jacket, and she found a pair of wool gloves in her bag and followed him out into the cold. The barn smelled of fresh-cut lumber and old hay, and the particular mineral smell of cattle in winter. On the north side, 3 sections of the roof were open to the sky, the old rafters pulled and stacked near the wall. New lumber was staged beside them, already measured and marked. He explained what he needed without talking down to her, handed her a pencil, showed her how he marked the angle cuts. She watched his hands the first time and did not ask him to show her again. She marked the second piece herself, and he checked it once and did not say anything, which she understood to mean it was right. They worked through the morning. She learned to read where he was heading. When he moved toward the staging area, she brought him the next D. When he went for the measuring tape, she held the far end of the board without waiting to be asked. The coordination built up between them without discussion, the way it does when 2 people are paying attention to the same thing. At mid-morning, she heard a truck pull in and footsteps on the gravel, and a woman appeared in the barn doorway with a covered dish and a thermos. 60s good wool coat, the kind of woman who arrives with food as a form of intelligence gathering and does not apologize for either. The woman's name was Mrs. Avery. She looked at the 2 of them with the frank assessment of someone who had known the man for years and was now cataloging the new variable. She said she had brought biscuits from this morning, and was there any news about the Thornfield cattle? He said there was not. Mrs. Avery set the dish on a sawhorse and poured 2 cups from the thermos and handed them over and stood for a moment looking at the open rafters and the new lumber and then at her. She asked where she had come from. She said Kenora most recently. Mrs. Avery said she had a cousin in Kenora. She named the cousin. She said nothing more after that, but the silence that followed was a different quality of silence than the one before. She had passed something. She was not sure what. After Mrs. Avery left, she ate 2 biscuits standing at the sawhorse, and he ate 3, and they drank the coffee from the cups. Mrs. Avery had left, and then they went back to work. The afternoon came down fast, the way it does in November in the north, the light going from clear to amber to gray inside of 2 hours. Levi arrived at 3:10 as promised. 12 years old, good boots, a serious face that had not yet decided whether to be handsome. He said hello to her, in the careful way children say hello to adults they are uncertain of, and then looked at the rafters and said they were coming along. She said they were. He seemed to take that as permission and went to find a work apron from the peg near the door and put it on and began moving lumber without being asked. She watched this, and something shifted in her chest the way it sometimes she saw a child who had already learned the value of making themselves useful. They finished the first 3 sections before the light gave out completely. He nailed the last board while she held the ladder, and when he came down he stood back and looked at the line of the new roof against the dark sky. She looked at it too. It was straight and tight and good. He said, "That's the worst of it done." She said, "How many sections left?" He said, 4, maybe 6 days of work. Depends on weather. Levy said, without looking up from coiling the extension cord, "My dad says it's going to be cold but clear," he said. "Your dad's not wrong most of the time." Levy finished coiling the cord and hung it on its hook. He said goodnight and went. and they heard his bicycle on the gravel, and then it faded into the dark. She and he stood for a moment in the barn, with the smell of new wood and the sound of the cattle in the next section. Then he switched off the work light, and they walked back to the house in the dark, and the cold, and neither of them spoke, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of people who have put in a full day at the same work and do not need to narrate it. The days had a shape by the end of the first week. Coffee before light, the barn, Levi after school, supper when it was done. She cooked because she was there and because she was good at it, and because it was a way of being useful that did not require negotiation. He did not comment on what she made, he ate it. She took that as the same as comment. She found things that needed doing, and she did them. The weather stripping on the back door had compressed and was letting cold in along the bottom. She found foam tape in the utility drawer and replaced it. He noticed it one morning and stood at the door a moment, testing the seal with his hand, and then moved on without saying anything. The second week, she started on the fence line along the east quarter, resetting posts that had heaved with the frost. He came out at noon and found her 3 posts in, the old ones pulled and the new holes dug to depth with the bar, and the new posts plumbed and tamped. He looked at the posts. Then he looked at her. She said, "The bar's in the truck if you want to take over the south end." He said, "I'll get my gloves." They worked the fence line that afternoon from opposite ends toward the middle. The cold was serious but without wind, which made it manageable. She worked at a pace she could maintain and did not race. He worked at the same pace, and she could tell he had noticed this without him saying so. They met somewhere near the middle of the line as the light was going orange. He set his bar against the fence, and she set hers, and they stood and looked at the run of posts, which were plumb and solid and would hold. He said, "You've done this before," she said, "a few times." He did not ask where or when or under what circumstances, and she did not offer it. Some people treated the absence of question as indifference. She did not. She understood it as the same courtesy she was extending him. That night she stayed at the table after supper with a mending basket she had found in the closet off the hallway. His, clearly, a shirt that had been waiting so long the button had been wrapped in masking tape and stuck to the collar. She re-sewed the button and mended the sleeve seam and folded it and left it on the chair near the door. In the morning it was gone from the chair, and he was wearing it when he came in from the barn, and he did not say anything about it, and she did not either. There was a woman at the general store in town who watched her each time she came in for lamp oil or coffee or the particular kind of oats he bought in bulk. Watched the way a person watches when they have already formed a question and are deciding whether asking it will gain them more than not asking. She let herself be watched and collected her things and went back out. The town was small enough that opinions were a kind of weather system. Unavoidable, occasionally severe, usually passing. She had lived in enough small towns to know that the best you could do was not give the opinions anything new to work with. The third week, he asked her over breakfast if she knew anything about skidding logs. She said she had done some of it. Handwork mostly, nothing mechanized. He said he had a stand of spruce he wanted out before the ground softened in spring. That the tractor would do the pulling, but that it was 2-person work to hook up the lines and clear the drag path. She said she could learn what she didn't know. He looked at her then, the particular look she had come to recognize, not surprise exactly, but a kind of recalibration, like a level finding true. They went out to the stand the following morning. The trees were tall and tight, and the floor between them was frozen solid and gave good footing. He showed her the rigging on the first one, talking through it without condescension, the same way he had shown her the rafter cuts. She watched the first pull from the side so she could see the whole movement. The chain, the angle, the way the tree came clear of the stump and lay down. Then she rigged the second one herself while he checked her work without touching it. He said to move the choker 6 inches forward. She moved it. He said that was it. The tree came down clean. They worked the stand through the morning, the cold air sharp with the smell of split spruce and diesel exhaust. She moved between the trees with the chain over her shoulder and learned which footing to trust and which not to. She fell once, not badly, caught herself on her knee, and stood back up without comment. He did not rush to help her. He watched to make sure she was up, and then looked back at the tree he was assessing. She noted that too. At noon, they sat on a downed log and ate sandwiches she had made that morning, cold now but good. The stand around them was half cleared, and the slash was piled neatly, and the logs were staged in a row. She looked at the work, and then at the sky, and then at her hands. The right one had a red line across the palm, where the chain had shifted on the third pull. She hadn't mentioned it. She covered it with her left hand out of habit, and then made herself stop. He said, "We'll have the rest out by Friday if it stays cold." She said, "It'll stay cold." He looked at the sky. He nodded. She bit into the second half of her sandwich. A crow landed in the slash pile and regarded them with the unimpressed intelligence of a bird that has decided nothing people do is particularly interesting. The crow left. The afternoon went on. By the end of the 4th week, she had learned the farm the way you learn any place that requires your full attention. Not by studying it, but by working every part of it until the knowledge was in her hands and her feet and her sense of the light at different hours. She knew which gate latch needed lifting before pulling. She knew the heifer in the 3rd stall that wouldn't eat if there was too much noise in the barn. She knew that the kitchen stove ran 5 degrees hot and that the propane tank gauge stuck at a quarter and needed a knock to read accurately. She knew that he drank his coffee with 2 cups in the morning and none after noon. She knew he reread the same section of the equipment manual on the shelf above the workbench when he was thinking through a problem and did not want to discuss it yet. She knew the pause he took on the porch each morning before he went to work, maybe 30 seconds, looking at the property and the sky, the same way she had noticed him looking at the fence line when it was done. The private accounting of a man who needed to see the whole of a thing before he could move to the next. She did not tell him she had noticed any of this. One evening near the end of November, she came in from checking the cattle to find a lamp on the table in the small room off the kitchen that she had understood to be storage. The lamp was not new. It was a plain gooseneck, the kind you adjust for angle. The table it sat on was the kind with a drawer, old but solid. The chair pushed under it was not the same chair she had seen in there before. This one had arms. She stood in the doorway and looked at this arrangement for a long moment. He was at the sink. He said without turning around, "Miss Avery dropped off some mending last week. I told her you might take it on if you wanted the work. She pays fair." He paused. "Light's good in that room in the afternoon. West window." She said, "You told her I'd take mending?" He said, "I told her she could ask." She stood in the doorway another moment. Then she went back to the kitchen and took off her outer jacket and hung it on the hook and washed her hands and said, "I'll look at it tomorrow." That night, she lay in the upstairs room and listened to the house, settle and thought about the lamp and the table and the chair with arms. She thought about the letter that had been forwarded twice. She thought about Kenora and Dryden and the place she did not name. She thought about the feel of the rigging chain and the way the spruce came clear of the stump and fell straight and lay in the frost with the clean smell of its own wood coming up from the cut. She was good at the arithmetic of leaving. She had run it so many times she could do it without thinking. How much she had, how far it would carry her, how long before she would need to decide. She lay in the dark and ran the arithmetic, and somewhere in the middle of it she noticed that the numbers had changed. Not because of the lamp, not because of the chair, but because of the way he had said she could ask, and the way she had heard in those 3 words something that was not an assumption but an offer, and the way she had already in some part of herself been deciding to accept it before she knew she was. In the morning she came downstairs, and he was already on the porch. She poured 2 cups and brought his out to him, and he took it without turning from the yard. She stood beside him, and they looked out at the property together in the early light. The frost on the roof of the barn, the spruce stand half cleared at the far edge. The sky was clear and very cold and very high, and the color of a thing that had been washed a great number of times. After a while he said, "The east quarter fence needs 1 more morning." She said, "I know." He looked at her then, sideways, and there was something in it that he did not quite manage to keep arranged. She looked back at the yard. She drank her coffee. She felt the cold and the warmth of the cup and the particular solidness of the boards under her feet, which were boards she had walked enough times now to know each one. He went in first. She finished her cup and followed. That morning they drove out to the east quarter and finished the fence. set the last post and he tamped it, and they stood back and looked at the run of it stretching out across the field, straight and solid against the white ground. The kind of work that did not require comment. The kind that was simply there now, doing what it was built to do. On the way back to the truck, he stopped at the gate to fasten the latch. She had reached it first and was already lifting and pulling in the right order. He stopped behind her and she heard him stop, and she fastened the gate without turning around. They got in the truck. He turned the key. The engine caught without complaint, she said. The north barn rafters. There were 2 sections you said you wanted to sister in the spring, he said. That's right, she said. If the lumber's here, we could get to it before the cold breaks. He said nothing for a moment. Then he put the truck in gear and they began moving down the track between the frosted fields. He drove the way he did most things, without hurry and without uncertainty. He said, "I'll call in the order this week." She nodded. She looked out the window at the field and the sky, and the long, clean run of fence they had just built, diminishing behind them as the truck moved away from it. The road ran straight. The morning was not finished, and neither, it seemed, were they.